62 today, and I am talking to Liana Fricker, who is a venture catalyst and inspirer in chief. Welcome to the show, Liana.
Thanks for having me, Matthew.
It's great to have you on. Thank you for joining us. So, today's assumption that we're going to be talking about is start again. And this is like, whenever stuff goes wrong, there's a voice in my head that's like, chuck it out, start again. It's never going to work. Just start from scratch. It's just not going to work. And I'm really not sure that's always a good plan. So I'm really looking forward to kind of getting into this one and exploring some more. But if you happen to be new to Delightful Descent, it's a shared exploration of ideas and things that people kind of take for granted that get overlooked. It came about from my work, really talking to people who take pioneering approaches to complex problems and to look at things differently. And Liana is very much one of these people. So yeah, I often found that this work has these weird, like hidden barriers that are in these deeper beliefs that we don't talk about very much and don't get to explore. So the show is really a chance to think about that and challenge some assumptions. I hope it gives you some ideas about things that can help you in your professional and personal life, but perhaps more importantly, I hope it gives you some ideas about how you can go out there and challenge assumptions yourself. Because I'd like this to be something that everyone does and is a completely normal thing. And the show's called Delightful Descent because, yeah, we might be disagreeing with the conventional view a little bit and taking a different path, but it's not about proving ourselves right at everyone else's expense. It's about exploring and playing with different possibilities and seeing different ways to look at the world. And the show is genuinely live, so please do bear with us if we have any technical issues or anything happens. And also, please be aware that there might be some challenging topics coming up. In today's show, they're probably likely to be around failure, injustice, perhaps complicity, and maybe around neurodiversity as well. And do be aware that there might also be strong language. So if that's an issue for you, then just please know that that's a possibility. There aren't any perfect answers here. So please do explore, ask questions for yourself, and ask us any questions in the chat. It would be great to hear from you. So, I first met Liana kind of on the last day of Happy Startup School summer camp, possibly in the last, like right at the last minute, um, despite having tried to try to arrange conversation beforehand. It's just, yeah. And then we had a chat afterwards, and I just really loved her kind of real energy and positivity, even when talking about some really quite difficult things. So I really wanted to get her on the show. I'm really pleased she's joining us today. So yeah, Liana, could I ask you perhaps to introduce yourself a little bit, maybe about the work that you do and the kind of people you like to work with, please?
Yes, I remember that moment so well. All weekend, everyone said, "You have to meet Matthew. You have to meet Matthew." I'm like, "I have to meet Matthew." And every time I would walk, like he would feel like this elusive character, and it was like the parting moments, like the buses are leaving. It's like, okay, friend, I'll see you soon, promise. And that's exactly what I love to do. I love to connect the dots between people and energy. I love it for myself, and now that I'm a founder, I love it for the world because for me, that's what entrepreneurship really is in its most fundamental form. It's connecting the dots to solve problems. And you can do that for a profit. And what I think is that you can do it for an impact. And the profit is the sign that the impact is working. And so, what I do and what the community of inspiration space really is all about is this concept that no one gets left behind, that we have enough knowledge now that we know how to build sustainable, profitable businesses that are balanced. And I believe that if you can create that profitable, balanced business where profitable or full balanced people are running them, that is how we're going to solve these really great challenges. Because from my experience, what I've seen is the byproduct of that is inspiration and creativity. And that's what makes the world go round for good and for bad.
And I think that The talk you gave at the summer camp where you talked about how inspiration can be used negatively as well. I think that this idea that there are all these tools out there, including profit and business, and how we can approach things that we can use for good or for ill. I really think that's such an important message on both sides. It's like, okay, these things we think, it's like, money. A lot of people who work in purpose-driven stuff have a really difficult relationship with money and how we work with it. And I probably include myself in that to some degree. It's not straightforward, but yet if we can use these tools, we can repurpose them and use them for good. And also to be aware that some of the things that we think are just good can also be used in much less helpful ways.
It's energy, right? All of it is energy. And we are told stories about what this energy looks like, who controls the energy, creates the energy, deserves the energy from the moment before birth, right? It's internalized in, our gestation in a lot of ways, from the food that, and the nutrients that comes into our bodies. And when it comes to inspiration, what had dawned on me was that we it has this sort of corny reputation. It feels a bit what I call pastel. And yet, when you understand what inspiration is and what it does, and the impact that it has on people, and the ability to pull people out of themselves into this transcendental state, and then therefore do things that they never thought was possible, you can see how inspiration has been the fuel of tyranny. But we don't talk about it like that. We don't talk about it like that. How else do you get normal, everyday people to commit these extraordinary acts of violence en masse, if not for inspiration?
Mm. Yeah, it's a really interesting thought, and I think it's something I really want to dig into actually, with a relationship to starting again and kind of wiping things clean. And there's a lot of stuff in there. Before we get too much into that though, how did you come to doing this? What's your journey to doing to this work?
Well, the short version is I just kept saying yes. I just kept saying yes. And again, this is a story that I tell often. Had it not been for Lawrence and Carlos at the Happy Startup School, I don't think I would be doing this in the way that I am. It's not to say that I wouldn't be doing it, but I don't think that I would be doing it the way that I am. Because at 2 a.m., in November, December 2017, 18, like when I was thinking about this, when I was looking for just a sign from the universe that I'm not completely out of my mind thinking that we can bring business and fun together without really compromising on intelligence, you know, and build relationships and create these really dynamic spaces for creativity. Had I not, seen the Happy Startup School and be like, yes, that's what I want to make. All right. Yes. Okay. People are doing it. Well, at least they are. Okay, off we go. And Inspiration Space was born because I am fascinated by the human condition. And I'm frustrated by how much potential goes to waste. And I'm stubborn because I believe that if you just crack it open, once it starts flowing and you can channel it, people can achieve anything. We see it in sport all the time. But I think entrepreneurship is one of those areas where, for whatever reason, we don't take that same high performance approach, which is a real shame because there are so many solutions out there that never see the light of day that would do so much for humanity and equality and get rid of the toxic things that mean we're all basket cases.
Hmm. And I think for me, particularly people whose experience is so vital because it's different, but because of that experience end up marginalized. And I think those perspectives are uniquely, have a unique value in this. And particularly around the performance thing is the very low bar of expectation, particularly around, around neurodiversity in my work. And that's like, it's a real problem to think about it as high performing, and this is, we share that interest. I think it's great, this idea that, okay, well, there's some exceptional ability that comes with being different as well, and how we can work with that, cultivate that. I think it's fantastic. So yeah, thank you for doing it. I think it's really cool. We'll have a chance to talk a bit more about it at the end, and if people are interested. But yeah, before we fully get into the assumption and exploring this whole start again thing, are there any quotes that come to mind, or any kind of ideas you want to share to kind of get us into this?
Yeah, it's a short passage from The Art of War. It was something that I heard bandied around, business discourse, and never really considered it until my speaker coach for TEDx said, you should, when I was brainstorming the ideas around inspiration, he was like, you should read The Art of War. And I was like, all right. And it's the idea that you have to, I'll read it out. Observe the terrain and your enemy, then adapt accordingly. A good general knows that there are always positions that cannot be held, roads that must not be followed, and commands from the sovereign that must be disobeyed. Just as water shapes its course according to the ground it flows over, so you too must adapt to the situation, to the terrain, and to the enemy's disposition. Observe the terrain, take advantage of its natural advantages, and avoid its disadvantages. In order to fight, do not climb heights, go upstream, or travel away from water and shelter. Avoid places where there are precipitous cliffs, confined places, or quagmires where a small force can destroy an entire army. Look for startled birds or beasts. They indicate you are approaching an ambush. Observe the enemy too. When their soldiers lean on their spears when standing, they are faint from starvation. When the soldiers they send to gather water start by drinking it themselves, they are suffering from thirst. And when they start to eat their own cattle, neglect to hang their cooking pots above campfires, and act as though they will not return to their tents, know that they are willing to fight to the death. Adapt your tactics as needed to these circumstances and take advantage of opportunities as they appear. Observe the terrain and your enemy, then adapt accordingly.
It makes me think of there's something around this that feels very much related to an inbuilt need to do this the hard way. I definitely have that. Definitely feel like there's something, not allowed in following the terrain. What is it that made you want to share that particularly, though?
Because for me, the big takeaway is patience. Be patient. There's power in standing still and watching and listening. And then you strike. So it removes that passion, that impulse, that let's just go. No. Be patient. And that's where purpose and intention really comes from. It's like, now I know this is the right thing. I know this is the right thing. Let them starve themselves out, because that's not sustainable.
And I feel that, as an alternative, very, very often I think that urge to start again arises when, certainly in me, when I don't have a clear next thing. And so that relationship to patience, to waiting, to see what emerges, definitely it's a really big kind
It's
of.
so counterintuitive, right?
Mm,
It's been something that I've learned like a muscle. Genuinely. It's like a muscle that I've really worked, and it was a lot of ego work, and like, it's in the same where you've had that dichotomy around inspiration. It's that same idea that you can win through like a different type of perseverance. And what is winning really? What is winning really? What is the outcome of this particular battle, of this fight? Where does it fit into like your bigger picture? Where
Mm.
can you concede? Because it's just not worth your own energy to do anything about it. Like when it talks about, be aware that if they stop, putting their cooking pot out and they're neglecting their cattle, they're so hyper focused, they're ready to go to the death. So maybe that's a battle you don't try and have, or you go around another angle. You do it another way. And for me, starting over is like, it's a series of micro moments. It's this ability to say, I'm not going to just keep doing what doesn't work, but that doesn't mean that I have to rip up the script.
Mm. Yeah, it feels like this relates to sometimes the way when I'm working with people who are really interested in transformation and really want transformation. And the challenge with transformation in any complex system is figuring out actually how it works and where it works and getting there. You can't do in one go. It's got to be a series of small transitions. And that is an incredibly, like, there's something culturally we're not supposed to do in that. There's so much pressure against following that somehow, that it's like, well, either you make it work right now or you chuck it all out.
Which is insane, right? I mean, that's where waste comes from. And I think it's, that's our extractive capitalist system that's become normalized. And, that is something that has to start over because it's not sustainable. The idea that you would just completely and constantly replace that everything has to happen so immediately. It reminds me of the first time my youngest child planted a sunflower seed. And they did it at school, and he came home with a little pot of dirt. And the next morning, he's like, right, where is it? I was like, where's what? He's like, my sunflower. I planted it yesterday. Where is it? It's like, it's not how it works. That's not how it works at all. And then when I started thinking about it, it's like, that's a really fascinating thing because when you plant, the first big leap of faith is anything even going to grow? Like anything. Are there any green shoots? Before it even, becomes the sunflower, is anything going to happen? And that really fascinated me that, in his head, it was like, I put it in, there's an assumption that obviously it's going to work and it's going to happen tomorrow. And I think that's, the modern Western, global North way. And that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it feels like also, and it's so related to this idea. Okay, well, then there's something fundamentally wrong with the seed as well if it doesn't do that, because it's like there's so many possibilities. It's like, has it not had the right context? Has it had enough time? Has it had enough, has it had water? Has it had warmth? Has it had sunshine to grow? And the context of these things also relates to the starting again. It's like nothing happens in kind of without so much stuff around it. And if that is kind of ignored and we're just like, oh well, it doesn't work, have we actually thought about, well, what did it need?
Yeah. And that's, I think that comes a lot with so many of us, with things that we try and then don't go back to, or what I say, one of the biggest tragedies are all of the ideas that never even get to what I call finish the thought. Because there's one thing between like having the idea and then not executing it. But there are people who won't even let themselves finish the thought. They cut themselves off. Who am I to? Right? And I'm like, whoa, like it doesn't even, nothing gets to happen with it. And that's such a shame. And I think part of it is because this instant gratification and not understanding that we do live in a system. And if we understood that, I think we would be more in flow with the organic nature of life, because it is that way. I just feel like we push against it unnaturally.
Mm. And that does bring me back to this idea of like, there's something in starting again in a more negative or more harmful way that feels like a kind of, okay, well, I don't like these connections to the rest of the system. I want this thing to be perfect and separate and like, idealized. And so anything that doesn't fit with that model is aberrant, is wrong, needs removing. And if you happen to fall into a type of person that doesn't fit that model, when this happens socially, then that's when we get marginalized. That's part of the whole thing of how we're like, there's a weird kind of almost like hygiene, but like a conceptual. And it's like it is about starting again or establishing something that's uncompromised or almost like unsullied by the messiness of reality.
I think it's like this two sides of the same coin, right? Because when you're saying this, what I'm thinking to myself and what I'm hearing is the idea that it's it's all well and good so long as people agree with me. And I say that as someone who's really progressive, almost like using my own progressive ideals, right? Like it's all fine when you agree with me. But if you don't agree with me and you're like on like an extreme, I will think that that is, well, how could that be your worldview? And that would be the same on the other side, right? People will be like, what? How can you not want whatever, insert, conservative value here? And I
We appear to be having some
think
internet
that
issues. Ah, you're back.
it
Yeah, we
is,
had a brief
there we
dropout.
go. Yeah,
Sorry.
it glitched like it always does. Yeah, it glitched. But for me, then what I'm hearing is when you look at marginalization, it's about creating this brave new world unapologetically. That's what happened on the way back from summer camp. I had to pull over because I was so inspired. My heart rate monitor on my watch was going through the roof. It was hilarious. And it was because all of a sudden it just dawned on me. I was like, you just spent 2.5 days in the company of the most creative, ambitious, accomplished, unapologetic, good natured people ever. And they all know at least 15 to 20 more people just like them. So you're not on your own. You're not the only person who sees this. And that was so reassuring. I was like, damn, what would happen if, I just like be the nerd and be like, right, let's go. Let's do it. Let's really do it. Let's create a movement. Because I think sometimes we're just waiting for someone to be like, right, I'll be the weirdo and I will say, right, let's make a movement. Let's go for it. Let's literally be like colorful vigilantes, you know? And that was this realization that I had after summer camp. I was like, man, we're just waiting for someone to get up and like be like, yeah, let's do it. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll do it. I'm still real quiet about it, but at least I'm talking about it more now.
Yeah, I think that like, and it's one of the interesting things with this like, with this relationship to telling a story and inspiring and telling a describing a world that's fundamental that could be fundamentally different, and this relationship to starting again, and this like the way that it shifts, there's something really quite challenging for me, perhaps also in the way that we do inspiration and we talk to other people, is that idea of like how we're what it makes me think of is when this idea of visionaries, and I don't identify with the idea of these people that have this kind of perfect vision. It's not the way I work, not the way my brain works or I see the world. Um, and I feel like I should have that first, almost. It's like there's a weird idea around, and if I don't, then I need to, yeah, I almost need to start from scratch again.
That's a very interesting point. And what I'm kind of realizing literally in real time, the cogs in my head are going. I think perhaps there's an element of privilege in it, right? And I mean that to say that when your life existence is based around visions of you as the normal, I think it's easier to not see everything else because it's just not your worldview. It's not your reality. Whereas, for me, being a Black woman in America, even though I'm in the UK, I've not been able to escape the shadow side of life. At the same time, I grew up, in a privileged position, you know, and so I have that where there are things that I just don't see. They're not part of my reality, and that is my privilege. And I think once you start to open yourself up to your own privilege and you really start to see the world and the shadow side of the world, it's like you have this choice. You can look away or you can look straight at it. And either way, because it glitched. So I was like, okay. And either way, you have to deal with the consequences of that. When you look away, you have to know that you're looking away, you can't unsee what you've seen. And when you look at it, you got to look at it. And for me, that's the thing I've struggled the most with this year is that I can see it. You can see it. And on the one hand, it just like someone described it as fathomless despair, right? Where it's like, oh, God, this is just crushing. It's heartbreaking, the world. And I suppose then there's this other side of me that is like, but can't look away and you can't just sit here seeing it and not doing anything. So what are you going to do? And, I choose the light. That was my whole starting again. There was a point in time when I was part of the problem. And I started again. It's like, you can change. You can be different. Of course you can. And so I know that feeling and that experience really well. And it's hard.
Hmm. Hmm. I my experience as a neurodivergent person is kind of similar, with the really big difference that my neurodivergence isn't trivially readable to people who don't belong to that group, which in some ways leads to almost opposite experiences, but a lot of similarity as well. And I think for me, some of the really difficult stuff is understanding my intersectional privilege and power and how it relates to, weirdly, to my own marginalization. and to the marginalization of
You're
other
you're
people like
oppressed by
me.
the oppressor too, because they're like, you're go be normal. Go be
Yeah,
that normal white man. Go on. Go do that.
exactly.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah,
Why can't you do that?
yeah. And when only one of those like three pieces of
Right.
identity actually fit me in any meaningful way, it's like it's such a strange experience. And I think for me, like, but part of it is dealing with that and our relationship to ourselves, and and when you say, I think there's something interesting around this, and like we can't change the history that leads us to where we are. That's not, and it feels like sometimes this start again urge is about like rewriting. It's almost like a separation from history, from not just context but the context of time. And instead, when you talk about this, it feels like setting out in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I am where I am, and I'm going to set out in a different direction. And one of the interesting things for me around creating change is, for people who are completely excluded, they don't have the power to create very much change. They don't. We need some intersectional privilege. We need some social capital. We need some power to be able to change things. So if we feel kind of compromised by that it prevents us from making change, then no one can make change.
Right. And there has to be permission to change. When you hear a lot in political discourse, oh, well, you're a flip flopper. I'm like, I like people who change their minds with more information. What?
Yeah, that's called learning. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
you know, People like that is lit. Isn't that like the one of the only reasons why like humans are existing? Like that's part of our creativity. All of these things, like it's learning new things and then adapting, right? Like it seems so strange that we live in, I suppose, a paradigm where change is not considered to be a good thing. It's a sign of, being unreliable and not trustworthy. And like you, I come at it from a different perspective. That's authenticity. That's being willing to say, I didn't know enough then. I have a new perspective and I'm changing my mindset, my behavior, all of those things accordingly without guilt or malice or anything else.
Mm. Yeah, that I think that kind of blame, either to ourselves or others, in that sense, yeah, it does prevent us from being able to engage with this stuff. And on some level, I mean, that does a thing, right? That serves a purpose. And I do wonder whether that's not always, that sometimes it's encouraged because of that capacity. So spotting where we are being made to think that way, we're being invited to think that way, feels like an interesting, why is someone interested in us thinking in this way? What does that do? Um, there's something really interesting for me in that, in how we're relating, and also I think something in this, the urge to start again is when it feels like there's nothing, it's almost overwhelmingly difficult to tell a coherent story. That it's like there's no way that this before and after fit as part of the same narrative, and that is a really scary thing. We need that consistent narrative. I've started to think of these things a little bit like plot twists.
Yes.
Like,
That's how I've described them. They're plot twists. Literally, it's like, oh, okay, I didn't see that one coming. Like a
it's
jump
not
scare.
chuck the whole book out and be like, oh, I can't do anymore. So we actually don't
Right.
have that We kind of pretend we have that choice. It's like starting again. It makes me think almost starting again is actually an impossibility on some level. It's
Yeah,
always,
but
everything's
it's
got
the
path dependence.
evolution.
Everything's contingent.
Right. We are organic. This is so evolutionary. Like being a founder of a business, it really helps you, I think, get real. Working for yourself generally. It just helps you get real about stuff. And I think that's a good thing because it opens the door for this simplicity and a way of prioritizing, well, what is actually important that perhaps it is harder to get to if you are employed. And one of the things that I say to myself, at those darkest times where I'm like, oh God, I don't know if it works. I just don't know if it works. Is this execution of it doesn't work. But what you're doing is you're putting out into the world a representation of your gifts. And as you do that, your gifts are getting stronger and you're learning more. And no business model is going to take that away from you. It's ingrained. So, really, what we're talking about is more a question of ego. Let's examine that. And I come back to that a lot because I find it really quite liberating, where it's this idea that this is a journey that I'm on, and there are certain signs that I'm looking for along the journey, but ultimately this is down to me and that moment before I take my final breath.
When you say ego, it makes me think about identity and so closely related to the stories we tell about ourselves. And interestingly, it also makes me think about sometimes when people do make change or try and make positive change, is that complete rejection of their previous life and identity and way of being, and how important that can feel. And for me, I think that can be really limiting too. It prevents us from taking forward that which is good, even if it wasn't in totality good, or if there's things to be improved. It stops us. It also alienates us from anyone who hasn't done that, which, and I come across this a lot in my work, where it's like there are these opportunities if you have the resources, if you have the energy, if you have the inclination, but it's not your responsibility to take on the world that way. And that's another really big thing. So I think, this starting again, this urge, to the need to take that on for others as well. It's like that's actually part of the marginalization. The idea that we should fix it. It's not ours to fix if it's not what we want to fix.
Totally. And then I guess for me, then that's where entrepreneurship as a job is so fun, because in the same way that I used to work in the creative industries in marketing, because it just combined all the things that I like. I like entertainment, I like culture, I like, like it was perfect, like play. And that's for me what entrepreneurship is also like. It's this ability to take my full self and attempt to make a living at it. And every step of the way, some things get easier, and then you're in like new territory again. You're like, I've never even been here before. Oh my God. And that's where I like this idea from The Art of War. And it actually is something that I listen to often, is this reminder that you just got to be patient more than anything. And you need to be in tune with your own energy so that you can work smart. And I guess the other big opener for me was getting my ADHD diagnosis. So then understanding that this is some of the things that I find more challenging are symptoms of my neurodiversity. And I'm trying to make sense of my symptoms alongside a framework that was embedded in me for the neurotypical world. So I don't really even see my normal. So, for me, 2022 has been about understanding, well, what is your normal? What is your flow? How do you need to work? Forget everything and everybody else because you're not them and it doesn't matter. And, everybody's just running their own race. So stop panicking, getting worried, this, that, and the other by looking outside of my own lane and instead pay attention to all the stuff in my own self and in my business and in my family or whatever that I'm ignoring, being distracted by, somebody else's determination of success or milestone or whatever that is, you know, just trying to keep it tight and understand that you don't have to boil the ocean to save the ocean. Just wake up every day and try and be less of an asshole. Sometimes it's as simple as that for me, right? It's like be less of an asshole today than you were yesterday. Because there's no like, oh, you were perfect. It's like just improve somewhere.
And like perfect is a doesn't make sense in this context anyway. I think the perfectionism, the idea that we can attain, it doesn't actually do what we think it's going to do anyway, very often. But I think, for me, certainly if I reflect, part of the urge to start again very often is this panic. It's the urgency of things. When we're talking about, like we're working, I'm currently working with Liana on with a low carbon accelerator. And when you're talking about things like climate change, it's very easy to feel panic and be like, okay, we need to like change everything right now. And there are lots of things like that. I experienced quite a lot of things like that. I think that might be an ADHD trait, actually. That like that ramp up of like, oh my God, what like is given to comes with the sensitivity to context and to change that comes
You
with
said it to me
ADHD.
once. You called it a pathological, it's pathological self-reliance. I remember you said that to me in a conversation, and I stick with that. I'm like, that's exactly what it is. It's like pathological self-reliance.
Yeah, we learn that we kind of have to do it all, and it's not helpful, I think. And I maybe part of this start again thing is actually related to the idea that I have to do it all, because if I start again, then I'm doing it all.
And it's the patience, right? Because I know for me, it manifests because I have so many ideas, and in my head, everything works perfectly. And what I'm actually trying to do is try and just take what I'm seeing in my head and make it exist in the world without understanding there's a translation process. And it happens so fast, right? Like that it's almost like like it just it and when you're capable, again, that's another thing that it's a blessing and a curse because you're like, well, I've got the ability to do it. And then all of a sudden, like, off you go. Like,
Yeah, there's this like, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
right,
There's a
right.
yeah, and this I think this, one of the interesting things about ADHD traits is they tend to lead to having a wide range of abilities across different domains,
Right.
because you're always like, try something else, do something new, because that's fun.
Like information, like walking around like I'm like a little mini encyclopedia about certain things.
Also, like really good skills about learning something new and looking it up. Like I can find stuff out, right? And I like doing that. That's rewarding.
Right. I'm like, if being a founder doesn't work out, I'm definitely going to be like an internet spy or like a researcher. Like, pay me to hyper focus and go down rabbit holes, please.
Absolutely. I think this, and on some level, it's a similar thing. That's why innovation is a thing. It's like, oh, there's something interesting there. And that's that they're all different ways of looking at the kind of same set of challenges. It's but that yeah, there's something about this integrating it, and also you mentioned understanding your own experience. And one of the really funny things for me about all of the neurodiversity diagnoses and exploration I've been doing over the last few years is like I've done enough personal development work to know how my brain works. Like by now, I've done a lot of introspection. I've done a lot of I knew how my brain worked. What's been revelatory to me is that other people's brains don't always work that way. And it explains a lot, that my working assumption was that everyone had tons of ideas all the time, and realizing that other people think of ideas as these scarce things
Right.
that don't
I'm like, I
like.
have so many, I give them away because I'm like, shit. I'm like, have them. Have them. I'm gonna start doing this like monthly session. It's like free ideas. Come and I'll give you ideas because I have more. Oh boy, so many. So
And
many.
I think this, because of all these ideas and the idea, also the idea that we have to do something with them, because that's a cultural thing that works for people who have really scarce ideas. He's like, is that's partly where the starter get is like, oh, another idea. Oh, I better start that then. Oh, I better start that then. Instead of being like, does this work for me? Does this work for the content? Is this what I want to do right now?
And
Because
that's why
like,
I've designed Inspiration Space the way that I have, because in the early days, that was actually my problem. I was coming up with so many ideas that I wanted to do under kind of Inspiration Space that there was a lot of like half started. And I was like, I've got to find another way. And the universe and planning and everything allowed me to design a way of working where the job is to give people ideas. And I'm like, perfect. And the other part of the job is to completely and totally step away. So give them without hesitation and without expectation of anything in return, but I can't get involved. I can't touch it. I no, like no, I gotta go now.
it's like at some point it becomes like a spider's web. You touch it and you're just like, the more you touch it, the more entangled it gets.
I call it my tendency to throw too much glitter on stuff. I'm like, you should have stopped a couple of handfuls ago.
And I think this is one of the, yeah, and I'd really like to explore for people a bit more around, like, actually thinking about, if someone's listening and they're thinking about doing this integration, integrating, building this stuff together, and working from their own need. And I want to say I have such a similar experience. The reason, now I work for myself, and I I work with the early stages of things. I work with establishing things.
Mhm.
As after that, it gets
It's like
into,
boring.
yeah, I lose
It's
interest.
totally operational.
It's like, why are we interested in optimizing something we already understand?
Right.
That just doesn't drive me. And I completely value it. I'm really pleased that there are other people that are good at it, because it's really important, but it isn't mine.
Totally. I think because I've bootstrapped and self-funded the business, that just required me to be incredibly resourceful. It's just in my nature. And I also find resourcefulness to be a really fun creative challenge. So I think I have an advantage kind of on that side of it. And when it comes to then working from my own needs, I think when you start, you know, from yourself, you automatically realize there's only so much that you as one single individual will ever be able to do. And so by the very nature, you start collaboratively from the very beginning, knowing that, you're not you this is not going to be solely on you, especially in the early days when you're just kind of growing and starting something. And as I've become more confident as an entrepreneur, as my ambition has grown and I've been able to, give myself high fives and be like, "Oh my god, you did that." Like there was nothing and now there's something. You did that. High five. At a time when some people can't even finish the thought, you finished the thought and put it out in the world. So that in and of itself is like you did it. And I think all of it is given me, I guess, the permission to be really selfish about how I work, but I do it in a way that isn't selfish, right? So understanding that my problem is I have too many ideas and I could try and control everything, be like, right, now we're going to do this thing and that thing. And that's what I used to do. But that's not sustainable and that's not fun because then you start alienating people by designing a way of working where it's like literally the service is free ideas is better. It's better.
I think there is something really interesting in this, particularly where we have a unconventional value, a value that isn't where there isn't just a normal job associated with a way of being. And this happens, this is often a combination of like difference and high ability. It's a uniquely challenging place to be. The world can cope with more of the same, but a bit more, and it can cope with different. It can't cope with like both combined. And and I think, this urge to need to also, I think that when you say selfish, I learned a long time ago not to avoid meeting my own needs, not to trust my own needs. And I think, actually that refocusing, and instead of trying to create something that perfectly works for the outside world, um, and feels good, is actually like stay with what feels good, start there and hold that, and then try the different vehicles and whether they work for the outside world. And I think for me that like, oh, I haven't landed on a perfect framing, I haven't landed on a perfect idea yet, so I'll just try another one, instead of being like, okay, I can develop this, but also that it will pivot and change and look different. It can be the same but different, instead of either being a completely blank sheet of paper or being the same as it always was. And that allowing myself that, because I think that's related to this strength. If I can't do that, then that's a real, I either limit myself in ways that I find really boring, or I make things incredibly hard for myself because I have to do everything from scratch every time.
Oh my God. Yes. Like, yes to that. Yes to that. And I think I know one of my challenges is the fact that mentally I live in the future, and then it means that I don't pay enough attention or appreciate enough the present. And that also then means that nothing ever feels good enough, nothing ever feels accomplished, any of those things, because I'm always in the future.
Mm. Yeah, I very much resonate with that. I think that, there's the idea that there is always a kind of, that we can reinvent a perfect tomorrow. Yeah, I think if I can put down that idea, if I can stop, as like related to the start again, it's like what we don't have to worry about anymore is the idea of bringing about a perfect tomorrow and coming up with the ideas necessary to do that anymore.
Yeah. And letting myself sit with the idea, embrace what I can only describe as the uncomfortable feeling of not acting on it and letting it pass. It's just like not phoning someone and just calling them and be like, blah, 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 blah. It's like I was like, I had an idea. It's like crazy stuff, right? Like it's like ADHD people things. Um, and just allowing myself to embrace what I think is the uncomfortableness of my mind racing and just letting it flow on through,
Mm,
just letting it flow on through and welcoming the idea and letting it pass and not trying to hold it back or share it or act on it. Just let it come in and then back out again. And if it was meant to be in the world by my hands, cool. If it's something I bring up in passing in 3 or 4 weeks, at some other random time, cool. But just let it come in and out.
mm, absolutely. I think particularly that, you know, yeah, letting that stuff, letting it flow, letting the letting the small changes accumulate over time instead of trying to control the beginnings and endings in quite the same way feels like a really helpful way of engaging with this stuff. And yeah, letting the idea kind of have its own life almost. And it also makes me think, you mentioned collaboration, and there's something so important in this. In doing it this way, it opens up the space for others to support us and to work with us around this. If we've got too much control and we're like, that there isn't that space there.
And I think that stifles it, that can stifle the greatness of your idea or the movement or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And I think that's why it's just important to have conversations, right? And you don't have to act on them. It's not, we're going to go and have a meeting about it tomorrow. It's just sharing your perspective because maybe someone hasn't thought of it before.
Mm.
Maybe someone hasn't thought of it before. So instead of assuming that they have or assuming that they have and they then want you to come up with the solution, just, it's just like almost this lighter, just having a conversation. I think for me, what I'm finding is it's coming more from this place of listening. And again, looking at summer camp, one of the things that we were doing an activity going around and saying, what is it that you're listening for in this space? And I waited and I waited and I waited. And Yvonne was in my group. We were cats. And like the only sound I can't make is a cat sound. Like I sound like I'm like dying when I try and like meow like a cat. And I was like, you guys, like of all the sounds we picked, the cat, like I can't do it. I sound insane. Like it's like, like I can't do it. And they were all loud. But anyways, I digress. And I said, one of the things that I'm listening for is the silence. Because I have a tendency when I feel uncomfortable to fill the space with my own voice or to offer a solution because I feel uncomfortable when someone shares with me a challenge. And I was like, I'm going to really do something counterintuitive and I want to listen for the silence. I want to step back and still be visible. I think that's part of the reason why my ticker thing went wild on the way back because I did that and I listened to the silence. And that was found in everybody else's voices. And then when I was finally on my own, my head was like, party time.
Yeah, I think that yeah, it's interesting. This feels like that that need to yeah to 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 act on things one way or the other, to decide all the time instead of letting things kind of decide themselves a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. So we're coming to the end of the hour now, but I'd really like to share with people, if they want to reach out. Do you want to say a little bit about the inspiration space and how people could get in touch with you as well?
Yeah. So you can reach me on LinkedIn or theinspirationspace.co. Yeah, just theinspirationspace.co now that I think about it.
Cool. We've got links to
And
both in the show notes.
exactly. And yeah, it's a space for aspiring entrepreneurs and companies of one. And we fill everything that we do with ambition and belief. We breathe belief into you, you breathe belief back into us, and it's all about growing together. And, if you're starting a business or you're thinking about starting a business, you have an idea, it's a really empowering space to do that because we believe your only limitation is your own imagination. Everything else is figure outable. And that's what we are there to help you to do. We connect the dot between different experts and perspectives, and community is really the foundation of that, and having a space where people can be seen and can be heard and can participate and build relationships with one another, because we win when the community wins, and people win by working together.
Mm. I love that. Thank you. Yeah, and I think for me, one of the things about being when we've got to engage with something difficult like that, I just want to say it is really difficult to hold those experiences, but being able to do that with other people is such a helpful way of doing that. And I think having been part of that community, it's really great. I really do recommend people check it out if it resonates. It's really lovely. So yeah, that's amazing. So super. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show, Liana. Really, really enjoyed having you on here. Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I'm just looking at Yvonne talking about the cat story. I
Yeah.
was like, I know. It was like literally, it's like, you guys, only sound I can't make. No, but I love talking to you. I love talking to you. And it is, these conversations, they may seem so simple, and yet they go a long way to keep the inspired. And that's what we need now more than anything else, because it's hard out there. It's hard out there. And we need to stay close to people who make us feel like sunshine.
Oh, yes, definitely. Well, you very much do that. I hope this has gone over for the audience as well. I really, really love these conversations. It's such it's a joy to be able to explore this stuff with you. So thank you. And yeah, and thank you everyone in the audience. Thank you, Alexander and Yvonne, for your comments as well. Really good to hear from you, and thank you for everyone in the audience for your support. It is what makes the show possible, and kind of legitimizes my excuse to talk to really interesting and wonderful people like Liana. So yeah, you can do share it out if it resonates and gets you thinking, and you find it helpful. Share it with someone else you think might find it helpful too. You can find upcoming and past episodes on YouTube and LinkedIn, and the podcast is also available, though still very much out of date at point of recording, if you search for Delightful Dissent on your favorite podcast platform. Next episode, I'm going to be talking to Charles Swan about who's a story selling coach, and I'm going to be talking to him about the assumption I know what you mean, and like, despite doing this show and talking professionally amongst other things, I definitely don't always feel comfortable making myself understood, or necessarily that I've understood other people. And I think relating to some of the stuff you said about, there's stuff around perspective and people who know that other people have different experiences versus people who don't really have that experience. There's some really interesting stuff for us to get into in that one. And that is going to be live at 1 p.m. UK time on Thursday, the 5th of January. So I very much hope to see you then. But in the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Thanks and goodbye.